the concept of doing two mini projects came about quite early, and it came with it the appeal of allowing those smaller projects to develop a more focused focus. You're more sort of strategic in their approach. I mean, the last album, I said to a friend a while ago, I said it was basically the 10 songs that I had written that might have something to offer to God's church. And that friend said to me, he said, well, it's no Pink Floyd The Wall. And I don't know what that means, but I know that it's a compliment. But this time around, I wanted it to be far more intentional. And I know that God is in the midst of all of our workings. But I guess I wanted to be as conscious of what God was doing as I could be, as much as I was able. And so started developing, on the one hand, a collection of songs that would be singable for congregations, that would feed into their life as the people of God, and would bring areas of our faith that maybe didn't see the light of day very often, bring it to life and give them words to articulate those things so that they could take ownership of them and sing them themselves. I mean, it's a profound privilege to be a songwriter for God's people. I don't know why anybody does anything else, frankly. And on the other hand, so with this congregational kind of resource, I also wanted to create something that nudged God's people beyond themselves. So more of a reflective tool that would be used to help consider, what does God think about the people who aren't here on a Sunday morning? And you know, good missiologists will always say that the church doesn't exist for itself, and so we're always looking at the empty seats around us and not saying, oh, we've bought too many chairs, but you know, who is it that God's going to bring into these places, and how can we let those people know that this place is open for them? And so for a start, it was two different projects. I approached different outfits in order to resource them. Obviously came, you know, with cap in hand to the National Mission Office for the missional kind of resource, and went and talked to PSDS and other groups about the congregational one. And then as it developed, Jason Garonsi from the Knox Centre said to me, when I had just rather boldly made the comment that it gets on my wick when people drive a wedge between worship and mission, he said, well, why on earth are you putting these two things on different discs? Aren't you doing the same thing? And I wanted to say, of course not, and have a big long list as to why, but it was one of those embarrassing times when you really hadn't thought about it like that, and I had nothing to offer, and I mumbled something and then shoved a big mouthful of food in so that I you know, would hopefully choke and not have to deal with the problem. And then as I reflected on it, there were all sorts of issues about why it wouldn't work, but as I thought about it more and more, I realised that I did want to have these things sitting next to each other. I wanted them to be listened to by exactly the same people. I didn't want a church to come in and grab a hold of the congregational songs that I hoped would make their internal life more vibrant and meaningful, without taking home the ones that were going to force them beyond themselves in terms of their worship and their engagement with the wider community. So I thought, well, the best way to do that is just to chuck them on the same disc, and if somebody wants that one song, well, they're going to get the other 10 for free, you know. And there's an element. I mean, every minister and church leader will understand. Sometimes you have to serve up something to God's people that they might not choose for themselves. And so I guess there's an element with this resource where I'm saying some of these songs are really going to leap off the CD to people, and they're going to go, oh, we can see how that's going to fly in our context, or what that has to offer. Some of them, they might take some time to sit with them, and I guess the hope is that some of the stories that we can tell in this kind of context might give those songs a little bit more of an environment to inhabit in terms of a space within our church. They're not all easy songs, and my hope is that they enable us as Christians to articulate the full range of our experiences and all of our lives before God in the context of worship, that no part of our life is ever excluded from worship. God desires all of it to be brought before Him, so all of it can be redeemed. So when we have trite worship that pretends like everything is, okay in the world when it's clearly not, then there's so much of our lives and experiences and emotions that are going untouched by the presence of God as it's manifested in His people. And it just seems so simple when you put it like that. It's so simple. But yeah, you want to think, well, okay, well, where are the songs that we can sing that are going to give people voice to their frustration and their disappointment, as well as their joy and their triumphs? And yeah, so that's why these two things have been conjoined, and and I'm hoping that the church can understand that this ministry of the interior, which is about I guess it's about ensuring that the life within the church is where we are most fully alive, we're most human, as Graham Redding would say. There's a sense where people have become a little bit suspicious of what we would call the attractional model of church, where we try and put on a show for people and they get drawn to that. But on the other side of that, there should be something that attracts people to the community of God, because it's where they find the most meaning and the most belonging and the most challenge and the most comfort to move beyond circumstances and to move into God's reality. So that's what the ministry of the interior is hoping to contribute to, that utterly authentic and vibrant life within God's people. But the ministry of the exterior is to say this life should never be purely insular. It needs to sort of gather momentum and then spin off in different directions and connect with the world, and then bring them back around into that place of embrace. How's that for an answer for those questions?
That's quite significant, really, and if I can help put it in perspective. Yep. You've talked about the big picture. Mm-hmm. The thing that's driving this project for you has a couple of streams through it, and both of them are grounded in a conviction in you that God, who's at the center of all of this, is calling a people to be His particular people who experience the embrace of that incredible love, and then don't just sit there drowning in it, but they are so compelled by that love and that vision of hope that they help others to experience it outside. And your songs and the kind of words and the integrated music that comes through is helping build that community that will serve the wider community in that sort of way, with God's embrace, and brings them together. So the stories, the individual stories of each of those songs somehow fits into this big picture. That
it does, and that's why each project begins with the song Haere Mai. Two different versions but the same song. The idea is that I wanted it to be very clear that even telling the good news isn't our idea. That we are drawn out of ourselves into the mission by the gracious God who first approached us. And the song Borderlands picks up a little bit on that too. But then I also wanted the Ministry of the Interior project to be headed up by Haere Mai, because it was written originally as a call to worship song. Leave all the stuff that is treating you as less than a child of a God, and embrace this reality, this identity that lifts you up to a new place of belonging and existence. So that deep sense of God's grace and God's call kind of underwrites all of the stuff that is there. And what you were saying there about God has chosen these particular people, I mean, people can start to get thinking about predestination and God likes these people and doesn't like those people, but I mean the Old Testament picture of God's chosen people is the light to the nations, and again the church is to be the city on the hill. It's the salt, it's the light. God's presence is mediated to us through Christ, and God's presence is mediated to the world through us, who is the body of Christ. I mean, it's an astounding thing. It almost sounds like it ought to be heretical. It should be wrong to say that we are carrying the presence of God to the world. But I'm only saying of God what God has said of Himself. It's astounding, but it's deeply and utterly true. God, humbles Himself to be mediated in the most extraordinary ways, and sometimes the most insignificant ways. Thankfully, that includes you and me, so we're all good.